This is your corporate digital communication assignment smart pack. Now you know this is level 7 and the most strategic level in your CIM journey. Now a smart pack is a detailed guidance which goes beyond the brief by the examiner that helps you to understand how to approach your specific assignment. Now your assignments are like business problems, and it's very important that you take a very practical approach towards it. Before we start, let's understand where does CDC fit in the overall picture at level 7. As you know, there are three dimensions to your postgrad level: the decision subject, the changers, innovation and entrepreneurial changes, and the communication subject. Now, those are the three components: global marketing decisions, creating entrepreneurial change, and corporate digital communications. These three are your ultimate CEO level subjects that opens up the learning for you to help you run any type of business, public, private, country, social enterprise, you name it. So let's move. Just like any assignment, the success of the work you do is about the background research you do. So this slide takes you through some of the fundamental research that you need to do to make this assignment a success. As you can see, we start with the financial analysis because at this level, you got to understand finance is the language of the boardroom, and you need to understand the company's health based on financials and go deeper into the syllabus related areas where you will have to do the audits on. So in your report, in your assignment brief, the examiner tells you a lot of information, a lot of guidance, including what are the aspects you need to look at to ensure that you get an A. So please read through every single word, paragraph, information available in your assignment so that you make the most out of the guidance available. Your task 1 is a critical evaluation of the role of your company's corporate reputation, identity, image. Now that's focus theory for this subject: reputation, identity, image. So anyone who's in this subject needs to understand the interrelationship of these three factors in business. And you're now looking at how are those factors supporting the objectives of your company. So the slide you see here is an extract from last year's HSBC case study, where the case study put out the 8 aims, strategic aims of HSBC. So for you, you will find similar information of your company's objectives in annual reports, CEO speeches, YouTube videos of interviews, etc. So we are trying to interlink these two. So that's what this task is all about. So remember guys, this guidance is a run through of your assignment, which is not about going in detail. So you have to work with the, the classroom, the master class work we do at Dafedil to get more deeper insights. So some guidance available for you to map a task before you get into details. So you can do this by yourself for every task, looking at what are the theory areas, what are the syllabus areas, what books you need to be having access to. So this is just a template of how you could plan, and let's move. So a model that you see here is from Van Reel, which connects the concept that the examiner is looking for. This is probably the only model that you're going to find that connects reputation into objectives, how a reputation can drive objectives in a company. So why am I showing this to you? By going through the conceptual learning that is available in your key textbook in the Google Classroom, the handouts, and the classroom discussions, it's very important that you pick the right conceptual or theoretical tool to apply to each of the tasks. So anything and everything that you find from the internet is not going to help you in a professional global qualification like CI. So keep that in mind. So what you see here is an example of a guide that takes you about on the process that you could follow, the steps you could follow to put together this task so it has a flow and it finally addresses the issue that the examiner is asking you to address. So Once again, if you look at this task, it's about looking at your company's reputation, identity, and image, the role that they play in supporting your objectives. So you're going to look at each one of these areas and see which specific objective does it support or even does it hinder. So that's the flow you're going to find when you read this through. So of course there are links to go through, some tips you could follow, and this is just version 1 and this will keep improving. Task 1.c. Now, why am I highlighting the word critical evaluate? Because earlier you had another term which was called, that was again a critical evaluation. So in CIM, we call these command words. And you have a separate command word guide in your masterclass. You have to go through that carefully. Once again, guys, you can't make a mistake on the command words, because every command word has a specific definition of what is expected at every level of this journey. So make note of that. I guess by now you are thinking the word describe is very different to the word evaluate. Think about it. This is straightforward. You are looking at the stakeholders that are relevant to your company and how those stakeholders influence your company's corporate reputation. You know that the government has a huge influence on the financial service sector, non-bank financial institute, banking institutes, in the way they run their business. When it comes to mobile, the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission. So likewise, there are stakeholders, your suppliers. Now, the secret to the success of this task is you get very specific with your stakeholders. Say when you say employees, you have to break the employees down to full-time, part-time, frontline, head office, subsidiary, millennial. Remember that, right? And give some stats to support that. Even shareholders, you might have big shareholders, single shareholders who have a big control, and different institutions, and they have very different expectations from the company. So get into detail and show how those stakeholders impact your reputation. Now for that, you need to understand the reputation theory. So some supporting material for you to read on top what obviously the studies you've done with regard to the subject, which has to be detailed. But these are some tips for you to go through. So watch this video from Davis, who talks about employees as a stakeholder. So similarly, answer planning and a little template that you could use, but please don't follow blindly of how to do a stakeholder map, which you can have as an annexure, and a summary of this can come to the body of the assignment. And few more theoretical areas from relevant authors. These are very credible tools that are relevant to this subject. The model here is an important model for you. You will come across this along the journey of learning corporate digital communication. This model from Phil covers how a reputation is built by using all aspects of corporate communication. So please get very familiar with this and use this along your assignment. So a few theory tips for you to go through and a bit of a flow of how you can start the task, how the middle of the task could be built through, and how you would finally conclude your findings. Remember, this is a critical evaluation. From a critical evaluation, obviously should come very strong, justified findings. I'm sure you're thinking, here you have to be very specific, which stakeholder group has which type of influence on what aspect of your reputation. All right, so the above slide shows different angles to reputation from one author. Of course, stronger students will look at multiple authors to show their depth of knowledge. Task 2 is a bit of a deep task for 40 marks. And that goes into the nuts and bolts of how do you build a reputation. So most of you are familiar with what Dafedil takes you through with regard to this adapted model, a framework of how a reputation is built. Now you know a reputation is not built for the sake of it. It has to deliver business result. In other words, a reputation is one of the most strategic assets in your company that you could use to drive business. But to build that reputation, you got to go deeper into the personality of the company. There onwards, look at the identity, the brand identity of the company, and then see how stakeholders perceive you. That's your image, which in turns become a reputation. So understand this deeply. Talk and discuss in your master classes if you're not clear. If you're not clear about this, well, you don't understand the subject. So the task here requires you A, to critically evaluate the current organization strategy, structure, systems, culture. And you clearly know that's part of the personality. And by evaluating it, you are trying to see how it relates to the positioning and the reputation of your company. So you got to think of this carefully. You already know the topic of reputation. You got to connect that to the positioning of the company, the strategic positioning of company. Most of you are familiar, and you will get familiar with the author called Aker, who has some serious work done on the top subject of strategic positioning of a company. And there onwards, you need to do a gap analysis between the dimensions of identity and image. We will discuss this as we go in our class, how these type of gaps occur. Clearly, the way you profile yourself to the world or your stakeholders will not be the way others perceive you. So these type of gaps could occur in your company, and in this task, we will go and look at that in detail. And then the third aspect of this task, it's a heavy task, guys, is to recommend how this gap between identity and image can be addressed. So you're looking at a couple of strong recommendations with theory applying to your company, and even bringing some benchmarks of other companies who've done that. And of course, those recommendations should help achieve those objectives that you've already mentioned. And you'll remember, these objectives should also be related to the theme of this assignment. And the theme you've already justified in the company background. The third task, or the task B of this, is to come up with an outline strategy to develop your corporate reputation and to build brand equity, to build the overall corporate brand. So you're looking at both your brand building and you're improving the corporate reputation. So you clearly know when you build your brand identity, over time it will build your reputation. So it's interlinked. So most of your work will be done on the brand development side, and of course every recommendation you make has to achieve the objectives. So a bigger focus has to be played on the role of your employees. Every time you come up with a strategy to improve your brand, you could do that totally externally, but there is also a way you can get your employees involved. So you saw how Kiehl's was using their employees to communicate some of the brand related values of the company, of being fresh, being responsible, their recycling project. So there are many examples in the world of employees play a bigger role in some of those brand strategies. And you know what happens then, right? It builds more credibility. So you are now looking at a step-by-step, I mean not a typical end-to-end brand strategy process, but maybe 4 to 5 specific strategic initiatives that will help achieve this. Like in every such strategy recommendation, you will have to now come up with a couple of ways, 2 ways to monitor whether that specific strategy you set is working. So for an example, if you're looking at a employee scheme that helps your service behavior inside a supermarket or in an airport or in a company that is extremely service driven, a bank, and how do you measure that? How do you monitor that? What tools can you use? That's the specificity that you need to get into. So this is a big task, as you said, altogether 40 marks. So there onwards, you move on to your final task, but before that, here are some guidance of the flow of the task. Read through it, use it to guide you, but don't blindly copy. It's just an idea. You can be original. And some conceptual areas for you to think through on strategic positioning, etc. And also the gap analysis tool from Balmer, it's called the acid test, which talks about the 5 types of identities and how gaps could offer. So obviously these are also in your reading material in the Google class. Branding theory, because you're going to talk about different dimensions of brand and how you're going to improve that brand, right? So there you go. Some thoughts for you to consider. Interesting tool on how employees play a role in the communication climate of the company. The final task is your digital aspect to this assignment. It brings you to appreciate the fact that the world today is digital and communication has to be absolutely appreciating that digital environment. Step one, you're going to look at how your stakeholders are getting digitalized. Investors today don't expect big books of annual reports to come to their homes. They want a Twitter update real time when a company makes decisions. So you got to read through some of these changes. Employees for sure, the millennial employees are totally digitalized. So how does these things happen? What are the new trends? Has to be researched to some good material, theoretical frameworks, and see what type of strategies, justify appropriate strategies for digital communications to support organizations' objectives. So, example, your employee communications, your investor relations, your lobbying of a government, all these things, how digitalized approach can be done. Surely you'll have to look at benchmarks of other companies who's done that effectively. So remember, guys, again, your keywords, the command words are very different task to task. Evaluate, critically appraise, recommend with justification, etc. The next task is looking to see whether you have a good, current, updated understanding on what's happening with the digital channels in the world. Social media channels, the websites, the app, kiosks, different types of channels, emailers, personalized emailers. And a lot of technology has come today in these areas, and you've got to research what's available. So, critically appraise the effectiveness of available channels. Evaluate key technology developments in each one of them. So, you've got to look at latest from Microsoft, what have they done with platforms like Slack, which is their employee communications channel. Um, Obviously, things like Twitter to YouTube, etc. What's happened with those, and then obviously you're looking at how the digital tools related to these channels could impact your company's reputation. As you know, a lot of unplanned communications happen on social media about your brand, and that can clearly have impact your reputation, both positive and negative. You saw what happened with Kapruka in Sri Lanka. Globally, there are so many examples. So you got to look at how these tools could impact your corporate reputation. So think about the flow, how to start, what are you going to write in the middle, are you going to use a table, and then are you going to justify that with a couple of points. Final task is a recommendation of a digital communication strategy to protect and strengthen. Remember the two words, guys. Protect and strengthen. So you got to address these two separately, and for which you need to appreciate your online reputation management theory. So how do you protect and how do you strengthen? So you'll have to use appropriate theoretical tools on digital communications. Some of you are familiar with a model called RACE, Reach, Act, Convert, Engage. So likewise, you will look at different communication models, and then you will see what type of strategic uh, initiatives you can take under this approach. So your digital corporate communications, corporate advertising campaign, to maybe sometimes you would look at your CSR outlook and how do you digitalize that, how do you collaborate, how do you co-create with certain partners, how do you do that digitally. So What type of benchmark examples you can bring in and justify how that could be applied for your company. So finally, you will have to look at two digital technologies that you could use to monitor uh, and measure your company's reputation. So this is an area, there is a lot of insights in your book by Chuck Heyman. You already have that book. It's called Digital Marketing Analytics. You're talking about tools such as social media listening tools, reputation monitoring tools. There's a whole heap of it, but you got to see which one is relevant to your company based on your industry, the level of interactions you have with regard stakeholders, at the velocity of activity that happens. If you just blindly recommend, well, that's not going to be a good idea. So again, there's a bit of insights on digital to understand where does your company stand on digital. Go through them. You will obviously get a lot of help in your classrooms and a little bit of a framework on online reputation management. This is where the monitoring part happens. Your reviews, what people are saying online, who's tagging you, what are they tagging you on, etc. And some insights on how such communications are structuredly managed and some frameworks how to do that. So example, if there's a blog post, is it positive or negative? And then is it aggressive? And then you have a process of yes, no, what you do. So some of these models can be used by you in your approach. And the key books for digital, as you know, digital marketing excellence is going to be key. So here is a little flow of each of the tasks, how you could start and how each of the tasks could flow. Guys, these are a very early level. This is our version 1.0. Obviously, there'll be more support for you to for you as the class matures. So key books for corporate reputation. The traditional books are available for you. The digital books and the digital sources. And this is a key book from an analytical point, as I talked to you about, especially on how to measure, monitor social media. Some of the handouts that you get are from the textbook that you see here, Managing Corporate Reputation. So you already got those. One by one is made available for you. Please go through them because this sets a good foundation. So I hope this helped you. As always at Dafedil, it's about making things easy and simplified for you through the masterclass and structured sessions of this nature. So time to move and start to roll. And see you at the next class and the next update.